After what feels like 37 E3s in a row with no Banjo 3, people aren't even bothering with being disappointed anymore, since at this point, it kinda just feels like the game's never gonna see the light of day. But even though I still fully believe that it's only a matter of time before Microsoft actually does something with their favorite Bear and Bird tag team, I'm actually really happy that they haven't done so just yet. Why is that, you ask? Well, sit back in your least ethical beanbag and allow me, YouTube's brawniest full-grown boy, CameronAllOneWord, to tell you why not getting Banjo 3 after over 20 years is actually the second best thing we could have possibly hoped for. Okay, so obviously the first best thing we could have hoped for was for Rare to keep making new Banjo games every few years and just keep getting better and better, regardless of whether or not it was for Nintendo or Microsoft. But you know what, since that just wasn't in the cards, I think we should all appreciate that Rare at least didn't just keep pumping mediocre Banjo games out just for the sake of doing it all these years. And look, I love Banjo Kazooie, but I'm not delusional in thinking that it's nearly as popular as some of the other franchises that have been milked over the decades. Hell, I didn't even touch Banjo till like 2013, which proves that my love has zero to do with nostalgia, but more importantly, that the franchise wasn't a phenomenon or anything like that, hence why there might have never been that much of a temptation to milk it for more games. I mean, it's not like Microsoft gave up on the IP after they bought it, cause we did get Grunty's Revenge and the racing spin-off Banjo Pilot for the Game Boy Advance that are fairly decent, and then of course there's Nuts and Bolts on the Xbox 360. Personally, this is the only game in the series that I've never even played for a second, but from what I can tell, it's not one that the hardcore fans really care for all that much, cause first of all, it started off teasing a classic Banjo adventure only to outright tell the player that the original Banjo formula was outdated before becoming an entirely different game. An entirely different game about building cars or something, no less. I don't know. Again, I never actually played it. I know that some people think Nuts and Bolts is still a good game in its own right, but even though I strongly disagree with the original formula being outdated, I totally appreciate the developers not forcing something they weren't feeling just for the sake of nostalgia. According to the designer Greg Males, or whatever his name is, the original idea was to remake Banjo Kazooie for the Xbox 360, and then it changed into a traditional game, and then it decided that a traditional Banjo game had no place in the market. His words, not mine. Again, I think there's always going to be room for a Banjo Kazooie game as long as it's good, but the fact is, they didn't feel confident in keeping the original formula fun, and even though some like Nuts and Bolts, most Banjo fans didn't welcome the changes, so the series has kind of just had its fingers stuck up its ass ever since. You might not think it could possibly be all that hard to make a new Banjo Kazooie game that's fun, but just look at how badly Sega's milked the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise over the years with so many mediocre games tainting the poor guy's legacy. But unlike Sonic, Banjo wasn't ever nearly as popular or well-known, so had they just kept pumping new games out then, the franchise probably wouldn't have been given as many chances to try again, and it most likely had been buried forever, rather than just collect dust on the shelf, cause at least now there's still hope, you know? For me personally, I don't think bad games or movies ever ruin the originals that made them great in the first place, cause at the end of the day, I could just ignore all the crap and keep playing or watching the goodies, so I'd say attempt as many sequels as often as you want. After all, it's better to know that potential sequels would suck so you'd have some kind of closure rather than just wonder what could have been forever and ever until the end of time. But still though, that absolutely doesn't mean that it's ever okay to make a sequel to something if you know it's gonna be mediocre or bad. Based on what some of the Rare team said themselves, they didn't think they could make a traditional Banjo Kazooie game that'd be as good as it should have been outside of the improved graphics. Maybe this was just Microsoft stepping in and being dicks, but I don't know. Even Banjo Tooie didn't manage to top the original, which, unlike movies, is very rare for a direct video game sequel. And then many years later, the original team behind the first Banjo Kazooie couldn't even top it with Yooka-Laylee, despite all the hardware advantages they had. I'll go into more detail on why they weren't better in another video sometime in the nearest future, but the key here is that making a good Banjo Kazooie game is apparently a lot harder than we all think. I'm not going to turn this video into a Banjo Kazooie wishlist or anything like that, but I will say that I am 100% certain that there's got to be plenty of ways that you could top the original. And honestly, ever since Banjo Kazooie made it into Smash Ultimate, now is absolutely the perfect time to pull the trigger on the franchise, and there's no way that Microsoft's stupid enough to not understand that. So why hasn't it happened yet? Well, because it's only been 2 years, you bimbo, be patient. It's possible that Microsoft already started working on a new Banjo game the second they made the Smash deal with Nintendo, but what I think's more likely is that they probably wanted to gauge the Smash reveal first before committing to anything, you know? Then after seeing grown-ass men crying, pissing, and pooping over the Banjo reveal, myself included, by the way, they've just gotta be planning something, especially with all those game studios Microsoft bought up. After 20 plus years and demand for a new game being at an all-time high though, they really need to make sure that Banjo 3, or whatever it ends up becoming, is done just right though. They could do a remake, I guess, seeing as how the Crash Insane trilogy did a good job of getting people ready for Crash 4, but like, Banjo Kazooie's already been re-released like 87 times by now, so like, I kinda think that we need to move on or start fresh at this point. Either way, it's definitely not something they should just rush out within a year or two, no matter how simple some people may think that'd be. Cause I mean, that is kinda how we got games like Sonic 06, and don't forget Conker's Big Reunion. Banjo 3 dukes the bed, then it could be a really long time before we ever see another attempt, if ever at all. So if the game fails, then it damn sure better not be because it was set up for failure in any way, and I can't imagine that Microsoft and that dashing, well-mannered, full-grown boy Phil Spencer aren't well aware of this. Because, I mean, come on, why wouldn't Microsoft want a solid family-friendly platforming IP to give them some more variety in their lineup? But the only way that'll work is if Banjo 3's good, and if Banjo 3's gonna be good, then they better spend more than 2 years on it. But anyway, that's all I got for today, though, so if you liked this video, then you should probably check out my full-length movie I made with Steven Seagal called Under Siege 2. If you'll excuse me, though, I gotta go milk my bull now. Later!
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.